I just want to find 11,780 votes.
Then the impact of the threat to abortion as Texans head to the polls. And news tonight, the January 6th committee will only hold 6 public hearings next month. I'll ask committee member Jamie Raskin about that. But All In starts right now. Good evening from New York. I'm Chris Hayes. We're just 11 hours away from polls opening in tomorrow's crucial primary election in Georgia. In the 2 marquee races, the Republican primaries for governor and for Secretary of State, 2 Trump-backed candidates are essentially running single-issue campaigns on the ex-president's big lie of a stolen election. You got former Senator David Perdue, close Trump ally who lost his Senate seat last year. He's challenging the incumbent Republican Governor Brian Kemp. And you've got far-right Congressman Jody Hice, who is hoping to oust the current incumbent Secretary of State, Brad Raffensperger. These races are notable not only as referenda on Trump's attempted coup, but also to set the groundwork for the next one. Because out of all of Trump's attempts to overturn the will of the voters and steal the election, it was the state of Georgia where he put his most effort. Part of that, of course, has to do with how humiliated Trump appears to have felt by his defeat there. Not only because the election was widely seen as a repudiation to him and his movement. It had been years since a Democrat won it, but also because he thought Georgia was a red Republican-controlled state. And in Trump's mind, state Republicans were supposed to help deliver his win. It all started almost immediately after NBC News declared Biden the winner, the apparent winner of Georgia. It was on November 13th, 2020, and Trump's meltdown began in full. He immediately started making baseless claims of widespread fraud in the state, which he says undermines his laws. On November 19th, the day before Georgia officially certified the election, Trump's chief of staff, Mark Meadows, actually reached out to Secretary of State Raffensperger, presumably to get him to delay that certification, texting him, quote, "Mr. Secretary, Mark Meadows here. If you could give me a brief call at your convenience, thank you." It's funny he doesn't put the ask in text. Maybe he sort of knows. As far as we know, Raffensperger didn't return the call, and the next day, Georgia certified Biden's victory as expected. Trump later went on Fox News to publicly lambaste Governor Kemp for not playing along with Trump's scheme to steal the election.
They had judges making deals, and they had electoral officials making deals, like this character in Georgia who's a disaster, and the governor's done nothing. He's done absolutely nothing. I'm ashamed that I endorsed him.
Now, a few days later, Trump actually called Kemp personally to pressure him into calling a special legislative session where state Republicans in the state legislature could throw out Biden's victory and instead appoint a slate of pro-Trump electors, which you might remember was also the basis of Trump lawyer John Eastman's coup plot. During this time, Kemp made an effort to publicly defend himself, mostly, honestly, by just throwing the Republican Secretary of State Raffensperger under the bus. Get this. Here's the statement. Releases it back then, reading in part, quote, "Georgia law prohibits the governor from interfering in elections. The Secretary of State, who is an elected constitutional officer, has oversight over elections that cannot be overridden by executive order." Of course, we already know that Trump was targeting Raffensperger as well. On December 5th, the same day that he called Kemp, Mark Meadows tried to get through to the Georgia Secretary of State again. Meadows texting him, quote, "Mr. Secretary, can you call the White House switchboard for a call? Your voicemail is full." So the White House put Raffensperger, who was clearly ducking their calls, on the back burner because they then had a new strategy. The same week Trump made those calls, his lawyer Rudy Giuliani went in person down to Georgia, pushing baseless claims of voter fraud surrounding a nonpartisan election worker named Ruby Freeman, who became the target of a slew of intense false right-wing conspiracies, which inaccurately claimed she was stuffing ballot boxes for Biden in the middle of the night. And even though those accusations were debunked, there was no evidence of fraud, Giuliani went to Georgia and said this before the state Senate.
This is a terrible, terrible constitutional crisis we're in. Don't have to be a genius to figure out what happened. And I don't have to be a genius to figure out that those votes are not legitimate votes. You don't put legitimate votes under a table.
No.
Wait until you throw the opposition out and in the middle of the night count them. We would have to be fools to think that. So no need to push it any further, but there's more than ample evidence to conclude that this election was a sham.
Again, all that completely bogus, right? There was nothing that Ruby Freeman did that was wrong. They caught her on some tape and made some huge deal about her. She's stuffing ballots. She wasn't, okay? They counted the ballots. They counted them again. But Ruby Freeman's story, sadly, does not end there. More on her in a moment. Giuliani's claims were mostly laughed out of the state. His legal challenges to the election went nowhere, so Trump began working on yet another scheme. Again, all Georgia-focused, right? On December 28th, a few weeks after those hearings, the then acting chief of the Department of Justice's Civil Division, remember a guy named Jeffrey Clark, he's plotting to have Trump install him as the acting attorney general so that once in power, he could release a memo using the official letterhead and implied legitimacy of the DOJ to say there were election irregularities in Georgia, as well as in other states, and to authorize the legislature to call itself into session to throw out Biden's victory. Had that plan succeeded, it would have caused a full-blown constitutional crisis. I mean, it's really hard to overstate the damage that would be done to our democracy for the Attorney General, the Department of Justice, to falsely claim there was election fraud and say, hey, Georgia, you should know, you guys should call a special election because we just can't say what happened there. Calling for legislators to go rogue and overturn the election. Now, thankfully, the folks at the highest level of the Department of Justice understood this, and they threatened mass resignations. Trump and Clark backed down. But that was another failed plan. The clock was ticking. Trump was running out of time. So by now it was January, and he finally made it through to Georgia's Secretary of State Brad Raffensperger for that now infamous call where he told Raffensperger to find the votes and griped about Ruby Freeman more than a dozen times.
So, look, all I want to do is this. I just want to find 11,780 votes, which is one more than we have, because we won the state. 18,000 voters having to do with Ruby Freeman. That's she's a vote scammer, a professional vote scammer and hustler. Ruby Freeman.
She's not those things, just to defend Ruby Freeman, who is being slimed. Now, to his credit, Raffensperger stood his ground, which is why he now faces the primary challenge tomorrow. Because Trump ally Jody Hice, who's running against Raffensperger, sure seems like he would have found the votes Trump needed. That's the implied rationale for his entire candidacy. But since that plan failed as well, on January 4th, just 2 days before the election was certified in Congress, a woman later identified as a publicist linked to the rapper Kanye West showed up at election worker Ruby Freeman's house. Now, keep in mind, Ruby Freeman has, like, people outside her house. She's, like, being berated on the internet, right? This person knocks at her door and says she's representing powerful people and then threatened they would come after Freeman if she did not admit to stealing the election for Biden in the next 48 hours.
We would like to let you know first and foremost, we have put in place that a way to move you, to secure you from what may be on the horizon within the next 48 hours. And we have probably 48 hours to move you, either do it on your schedule. I cannot say what specifically will take place. I just know that it will disrupt your freedom and participate the freedom of one or more of your family members. You are elusive for a party that needs to tidy up.
You are a loose end for a party that needs to tidy up. Now, again, Ruby Freeman didn't cave, right? She didn't sign a false confession. She showed an incredible amount of courage there under truly bizarre circumstances, under pressure from this person who's representing herself as a emissary for the powerful, right? Ruby Freeman stands her ground. And another attempt by Trump and his allies to steal Georgia failed. But we're not done yet, because that same day, January 4th, U.S. Attorney for Georgia named B.J. Pak resigned. Now, that was weird at the time. We all kind of noted it, like, that's strange. That doesn't usually happen. He later said he quit before he could be fired by Trump for, you guessed it, refusing to support Trump's claims of election fraud. It was a multi-pronged, systematic effort over weeks and weeks and weeks. Trump tried every link in the chain to see what would break so that he could overturn the results of the free and fair election in that state. None of them worked, which is why he ultimately whipped up his supporters into a violent frenzy where they tried to overturn the election by force. Okay, next time, he's hoping he doesn't have to, right? Because his conception was, if I have my people in Georgia, they will deliver the state for me. That didn't happen. But what he wants is that if he doesn't win outright next time, he wants to cleanly steal it the next time. And so the first step for him is personnel, right? It's replacing politicians like Governor Brian Kemp and Secretary of State Brad Raffensperger, who are political allies or Republicans, who simply didn't go along with the plan. And on the eve of the primary election tomorrow, where this is the key thing that Trump is focused on, Kemp looks safe for now. Raffensperger, Secretary of State, the man who runs the elections, we don't know. That could be a real race.